what?
Would he warn them?
In some cases they do. And they might, I mean, the hotheads in the village might be upset about it, but there would be no system of justice or laws that could be used to punish him for doing it. One of the, and this is related to the question that the woman over here asked, it's very difficult for us to think of these communities as sort of volatile, flexible things that change in size and shape, and they're porous, and people come in and go out. And so that the community itself, although it has, you know, a markedly inbreeding characteristic, and everybody in them are related, there are factions within these communities of groups of people who are more closely related among themselves than they are to other people in the community, and sometimes, you know, segments of these hive off. And so it is not absolutely accurate to assume that the interests of everybody in even these small kinship communities are 100% consistent with all other interests represented in that community. There can be factions and arguments and anger in it, and the community is not, in a Clausewitzian sense, the war-making unit, because it can split into two parts, and both parts will be at war with each other the next day. It's better to look at their violence and warfare as conflicts between groups of closely related individuals who have a common kinship interest against other similar groups, although they do take place physically between things that look like they are completely independent, fixed, enduring villages forever.
Somebody gave me a pair of prescription sunglasses that was in the lounge. If you lost these, please get in touch with me. Okay, next question here.
Okay, this is for Dr. Siegel. Earlier you answered a question about, forgive me, I have a short-term memory of about 30 seconds. Was it about a religious affiliation or a genetic component for religion in twins? Could you refine that by explaining whether you meant MZs or DZs, whether you meant separately reared or together? And what interests me most, and it sounds like a narrow question, but I think it might have broader implications, what exactly do you mean by 40–50% having religious, I don't know whether you use the term inclination or affiliation? It strikes me that this could be a function of a number of variables. First, of course, whether they're MZ-DZ, raised apart or together, but more important, whether they were influenced by the religious environment in the home where they were reared, and specifically whether this is you will go to church A and embrace belief system B, or, and this is really what interests me, whether there's a finding that in these twins there is a drang, an urge toward religion, and how you define religion.
Okay.
The Drang nach Religion.
I think I've got it. Well, first of all, when you use twins in any study to try to understand genetic and environmental contributions to that behavior, you do use MZ and DZ twins. And you have to, because if there's no difference in the two groups, then you really can't say much about what the different contributions can be. The MZs have to be more alike than the DZs on the behavior of interest. Now, in the social attitudes study, that was done on Australian twins who were raised together. On the study of religiosity, that was done on twins raised apart. When I talk about measures like 40 and 50%, what I'm referring to is the amount of variation, or, I mean, in other words, if we took a survey here in this room of religious attitudes, or however we were going to measure it, there would be differences among us. And what we want to understand using twins is what's the proportion of those differences associated with the fact that there are genetic differences between us, okay? So when we did that twin analysis, it turned out that we did get variations in those samples, and 40 to 50% of that was due to genetic factors, with the other 40 to 50% being due to environmental factors. Now, what items did we look at in religiosity? This was not a study of mine, so I'm trying to remember, but I do know that some of the items had to do with religious attendance, how often you would attend a church or a synagogue or what have you. How often did you participate in religious activities of a voluntary nature, go to religious lectures or things of that sort? But it was not religious affiliation per se, which was a function of the home to which one was in which one was raised. So that's the kind of thing that we're talking about. And there are many, many ways of measuring religious affiliation or religious interest, is what I mean, religious interest. And this is just one early study in that area. I think there'll be many more coming out of that.
could be virtually completely invalid because those young people or those individuals might be just following the dictates of their parental environment.
Okay.
What I was struggling to get
Okay.
is if there's any innate feeling toward a belief system or religion.
I mean, is there some innate reason why one would prefer to go to Judaism and one to Catholicism? Is that what you're asking? Well, but remember, too, that not all the adoptees were placed through religious or through adoption agencies. A lot of these were private adoptions, in which case that probably wouldn't even be an issue. But let me point out that, you know, our common criticism of twin research is that individuals are the way they are because they had a certain type of parental upbringing. But keep in mind that these are now twins who were raised in separate, uncorrelated environments, and yet despite that, the identical twins are still more alike than the fraternal twins. And even if the home environments were the same, and we've not looked at this as far as religiosity goes, we have looked at this in terms of intelligence levels. The home environment did not make any difference at all in terms of the twins' IQ. We looked at things like physical facilities in the home and parental education and socioeconomic status. Those were not related to the twins' IQs in predictable ways. Now, in terms of religious issues, I suppose one would have to look at that, but then you have to have a theory about how it would affect it, what would be the direction of that difference. So I think you have to formulate the criticism a little more specifically than you're doing.
Okay, let's take a question here, and then we're finally going to have to get to lunchtime.
Yeah, I have a question for both Dr. Shaglin and Dr. Siegel. I have an interest in kinesics, which is nonverbal communication. And I was noticing when you had the earphones on the head man, and you were asking him if he likes the music, he was shaking his head vigorously, nodding his head, and which we accept as a positive response. My question is did he learn this, or is this a universal gesture? And my question to Dr. Siegel is for gestures in general, do you find that twins that are separated have a tendency to use the same hand gestures? And by the way, you have an interesting hand gesture. When you speak of twins, you hold two fingers. When you're giving your opinion, you're pointing to yourself.
Well, now that I know that I point to myself and I give my own opinion, I'm going to point to you. What we have found is that the rear-to-part twins do show various similarities in gestures, in how they stand, how they sit, how they walk. I think in the unposed photograph series that I showed yesterday, you got somewhat of a flavor of that. But we saw it in other ways too, in the way the twins walked. I remember in one of the early pairs that I studied there, two males reared apart and reunited at age 18, and they both used to kind of swing back and forth when they walked. We've not analyzed those systematically yet, but we have conducted videotaped TV interviews with all the twins, and we get close-up shots of hands and feet, and if they're smoking, how they hold the cigarette, things of that sort.
Knapp, I did go to the Monterey Language Institute and had them listen to that segment of tape where the chief replied, and they said the translation was, "I prefer the Isaac Stern recording of Vivaldi's First."
Actually, if you're interested in kinesics, you may have noticed that he said yes 3 different ways. He went, which means yes, and he rolled his eyes back, which means yes, and he went, which means yes. And no, it wasn't learned. I mean, it wasn't introduced from the outside.
Bernie?
No, I just actually wanted to ask a question. I mean, how many of you were raised in religious homes? And how many of you are now what you would describe in Huxleyan terms as agnostic? Yeah.